Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Rock Your Shine After You've Been Cracked Wide Open. Today, I have a very special guest with me who is also a dear friend and a colleague. And I have been wanting to get her on the show for quite some time. And so I am thrilled to pieces that you're here, Maggie. And I just want to quickly introduce you. So, Maggie Fisher is a creative communicator, connector, and a 9-year breast cancer survivor who leveraged that experience to develop and hone the art of resilience. Professionally, she has spent the past 25 years working closely with healthcare clients, developing and promoting digital health initiatives and programs that improve clinical care and improve lives. And that's how Maggie and I met and worked together for several years. And I want to welcome you, Maggie, because I have been so inspired by your story. And I'm very grateful that you have agreed to share it with the world. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, and I've loved seeing how this vision and dream of yours has become a reality, and it's like super exciting. So I'm glad to be able to be part of this.
Thank you. So let's just jump right into your story. Why don't you take us back 9 years? What was happening in your life and what happened before your life turned upside down?
Yeah. So, gosh, I was living living my life, right? As we do. I was working. I had, you know, my husband, we have two daughters. They were in college, I guess, at the time. But even leading up to that, we had, moved to North Carolina from Virginia, sort of, started up a bit of a new life. But I was just going through the motions, right? I went day to day to day. I wasn't really that was like my entire focus always was just like my kids making sure they were where they needed to be, that they had, all the paperwork submitted for, this thing or that thing. And it was like, that's kind of what my life was. And it wasn't bad, don't get me wrong, but I didn't have time in there for me. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. It was just, that's not how I even, operated or thought. And
Like you weren't sitting there in your day to day going, "Oh, I have no time for me." You were just doing
no,
you were just doing the grind, right? You were
I
getting
was,
up.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was in a routine. I was, if you'd said, "Oh, are you happy?" I'd be like, "Yeah, sure, I'm happy." I drank a lot. I was, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was very like ordinary. And to the point where like this is how caught up I was in like not focusing on me. It's like I had skipped a mammogram, like I said, we had moved, and I'm like, oh, I need to go get that done. And sure enough, I went, had it done, got the call. Oh, they saw something and want to, just do a biopsy. And it had been 2 years. I had skipped, so it was like 2 years. And I go in for the biopsy by myself because I was just didn't even think it was going to be anything. And, you know, that was actually a pretty daunting procedure. And it was, now when I hear people go for the biopsies, I insist that they take someone with them. But I didn't even know what to expect. And then it was right before our older daughter was getting ready to graduate from college. And so we had been planning this party and, the weekend festivities. And the Thursday before her graduation, I got called in to meet with the nurse navigator at the hospital. And they're like, oh, you have cancer, you have breast cancer. And the good news is and, at that point, I'm like, I'm not hearing anything.
Were you by yourself?
No, actually, my husband was with me for this appointment. And I know I look over at him and he's just shell shocked. And they're trying to tell me that the good news was that they were able to get the pathology back in time so that they could tell me like what type, what stage. So it ended up that I had two, stage 2B, like, with staging, there's these different levels, depends on lymph node involvement and, things like that. And that's actually what had gotten me to go in. was I was putting on my deodorant one morning and I felt a lump in my armpit. And I'm like, I don't think that's right. And, so it wasn't even like that I had gone back and had my regular screening mammogram. I had found this lump. So anyway, so they're telling me, oh, the good news is you're what they call triple positive, meaning, there's three different like hormone receptor, estrogen, and progesterone or something like that. And I was positive on all of those. And the reason they said that was a good news or good thing is because it meant there were more treatments that were available for me. But it was a pretty good sized tumor. And because it had moved to my armpit, they were confident, that there was lymph node involvement. So I was like, oh my God, I literally was numb. I couldn't even believe it. And they, this was on a Thursday, and I said, my daughter's graduating from college on Sunday. We're driving, up to Chapel Hill, and they looked at me and they're like, cancer doesn't have a timeline and cancer doesn't care. And they said, there's people that get diagnosed on their birthdays. There are people who get diagnosed a few days before Christmas. Like total clinical approach, right? Like no emotion or, oh, we're so sorry. But I was shell shocked. And so, long story short, I got in to see the breast surgeon quickly. They got me connected with the medical oncologist who, managed my chemotherapy. And because of the type of tumor that I had and the size of it and whatnot, they decided to do chemotherapy prior to surgery. So my course of treatment was like 18 weeks of chemotherapy, surgery, and then 36 weeks or 36 treatments of radiation. And then there was another medication that I had to go in once a week and still, get an infusion, and then pills, because I was estrogen positive. I was on tamoxifen and then another drug called Arimidex. And so they were all like, oh, this is fine. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm still like, can't even deal with this. And I'm just blown away. I accept
So,
everything
so,
that
so
they're
wait
telling
a
me.
second. So they tell
Yeah,
you about the cancer, then they tell you about all of this treatment that you have to
all in
do,
the one
and you
sitting.
haven't even, this is, and going back to the idea of grief, you haven't even taken in that you've got cancer. It's like
No,
when you're told that someone died, you haven't even registered that part, and yet they're going off about weeks and weeks of chemo and surgery, and you're like, I haven't even accepted the fact that you're telling me I have cancer in my body.
that's absolutely right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I look over at my husband and, he's tearing up. I'm tearing up. It was just a very surreal experience. So, I jumped in. Thank God. So I got connected with a nurse navigator through the health system where I was treated, who ended up becoming a very, very dear friend and was an amazing guide through the treatment process. She was there for me if I am, woke up in the middle of the night, as I often did, with my mind just racing. I could send her an email, and when I would wake up in the morning, she would have responded. Like she was, super compassionate and caring. And but that's kind of, I jumped in, started the treatment, and all, everything that you've seen with people who go through cancer treatment, lost my hair, all sorts of,
What's going on
this,
with your daughters? Because you said you had a daughter graduating. Did you go to graduation? Did you keep this
yeah,
from your daughters? Did you tell them what's going on? Like, how did you handle? Because I think that, you know, when we're diagnosed with something that is so catastrophic, you're a mother, so you immediately go into protection mode, right? Like, what do you tell them? How much do you tell them? So how did you handle that piece?
yeah. So good point. Our one daughter was actually home with us when this happened. She was had just had her last exam. She had come home. She was a sophomore, I guess, in college, and she was going to then go back and do summer school up at Chapel Hill. But and I'll get to that in a second. But so she was home, and so she was there when we came back. She told her. And of course, we're just devastated. And, it was so much emotion. And my inclination was to not tell my other daughter. My inclination was, let's just get through this weekend. This is not about me this weekend. It's about, you know, our daughter. And, we were meeting her boyfriend's family, who's now her husband and soon to be father of my grandchild. But anyway, that's on the good side of the story. We're back at the sad side. And so anyway, my younger daughter's like, no, you can't not tell her. She will, be just so upset if she realizes that this had happened and I hadn't, clued her in. And looking back on it now, it's amazing to me how together my kids were about all of this. And so often they were sort of the sensible ones in the room who helped me put things into perspective. So we called our daughter and we told her, and of course, she was really upset, but was grateful that she knew. And so we got through the weekend. We didn't tell anyone else, but we got through the weekend. And after the graduation, which was on a Sunday morning, my husband had to come home back to Charlotte where we were living. It's about 2 hours away because we had pets and he had to get home for the day with the pets. But I stayed, and the girls stayed with me in the hotel. And we went and had a really nice dinner and just sort of talked about everything. But I'll be honest, like my biggest fear was looking at them just coming into their lives. The older one was graduating and had, exciting things ahead. The younger one was, a sophomore. They were just, full of life and promise. And all I'm thinking is I'm going to die and we're not going to be able to experience any of this. And I was immediately focused on the loss aspects of my experience. And, I'm never going to get to see grandkid. I'm not going to know who they're going to marry. I'm never going to get to see my grandparents. I'm not going to get to see them, have their careers. Those were the things that were in my mind constantly. And it was, then that was early. And so these were the fears that I was having immediately. And then I got into treatment, which was, it was, it stinks. It's awful. Everything about it is horrible. Any kind of physical indignity that you can imagine, happens, right? You lose your hair. I got like these blister things all over my face and my head. I was constantly, I never was like sick, but I, lost my appetite, my taste buds changed, just everything you can imagine. And each subsequent treatment, it was more and more difficult to recover. And so, and I knew like
I really want to slow you down. Okay, so all of this stuff is going on. You've got your fears and you've got your physical health that it's horrible. What's happening around you? Are you sharing your fears? Are you trying to feel like you've got to swallow back the things that you're afraid of and going back into that mama mode and make sure that everybody around you is okay? How are you navigating all of these different aspects of this nightmare that you are now a part of?
Well, you just nailed it. And I think because you know me, I'm like more worried about how everybody around me is taking it, right? So like with my siblings and with, even with my husband
Your
and the
husband.
girls. And I'm like watching them and making sure that they're okay. And like one time I remember coming back from my chemo treatment. So here's an example. You go to your treatment, it's like a 7-hour thing. You sit in the chair. I would like pack a bag with a book and games and stuff. But it was really important to people around me that they be able to come sit with me. And I realized pretty early on, I didn't want that because like the people who would come sit with me would just talk constantly, and would just constant chatter. And you're in a room with like 9 other people who are going through the same thing. Like people might want to be sleeping. There were so many reasons why I didn't want to do that. But I never had the courage to say, no, I just want to be by myself. Don't come with me. And
How
so,
come? How come,
because I didn't want
Maggie?
to hurt anyone's feelings, I wanted to give everybody the opportunity to be able to, be there for me, even if it wasn't what I wanted.
Really
And a lot of
powerful.
that's baked into the type of person that I really was at that time. I still am a little bit, but I'll get to that. I've kind of evolved away from it. But the
I definitely want to circle back to this, so
yeah,
keep going.
yeah. So yeah, so I would have people, sitting there with me, and I just didn't even want that. But this one day I had come back and I was, here's the other thing, like I was like, okay, so there have to be like benefits to this, right? So I was just assumed that like I wouldn't have to cook meals anymore, do things like that, right? So from sitting in that chair for 7 hours with a thing plugged into my chest, and I had to make dinner. So I'm in the, which I didn't feel like eating. So I'm in the kitchen preparing dinner. And again, like I wouldn't be the type who'd say, I'm not cooking. I'm like, okay, I'll make you something for dinner. And I was sharing a story about this man who both he and his wife were going through treatment at the same time. And I mean, just the sweetest, sweetest old couple. And I think I made the comment like, wow, I see that and I feel like I'm really lucky. And my husband looks at me and goes, what do you mean you're lucky? And I'm like, well, I mean, I feel like I've got people, who can help me and who are around me and so I was like putting a positive spin on what I was going through. And he's just looking at me like, how could you say that? And I said, I just feel like things could be a lot worse. And so again, it was like I was more concerned about putting up a brave front for the people around me, which is kind of, what I do. So one day while I was sitting, again, I was back there for a treatment and I'm hooked up, and that nurse navigator I mentioned, she comes in and she handed me a brochure for this place that was in the mountains of North Carolina. And she said, I want you to look at this and give it some thought. When I got this, I thought of you, and I looked, it was a retreat center for cancer survivors. And it was like a 4-day wellness retreat, and it was all paid for. It was all covered. You didn't have to pay for it. And it was yoga, meditation, healthy eating, things like that. And I was like, okay. And so I submitted my application. It was a really lengthy application. I spent a lot of time filling it out and submitted it. And I think there was a retreat coming up in like September, and this was July. And in mid-August, I got a call from the person who ran the retreats, and she's like, oh, I got your application and I wish that it would work out for you to come, but we don't have any openings coming up. We're really focused on people who are really, really sick, and you're just not in that category. I was like, what? And she's like, no, 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 we only open this up really to people who've had like recurrences and really, really bad, prognoses. But, keep up the good fight. And, it's been great talking to you. So I hang up, and I actually kind of laughed. And I said to my husband, I'm like, I'm not sick enough to go to this retreat. Meanwhile, I mean, I was a mess. I had lost close to 20 pounds. I had no hair. Like I said, I had these blisters on my head. It was just, I felt horrible. It just everything about it was terrible. So, we just kind of talked up.
I mean, even talk, it's bizarre.
I know.
And
I know.
so, did you talk to your nurse to tell her that you were not allowed to come to
Yeah, and
this?
that was the big joke, is that, oh yeah, I wasn't sick enough. I mean, they could only take like 12 people into something like that. I don't remember. But yeah, it was just kind of like, wow, well, that's kind of crazy. But now, so that was like mid-August. In September, it was my last treatment in that year. It was like September 18th was my last chemo. So I had just come home from that. And this was like the very last. And then I was taking a break for a month, and then I was having my surgery. So that's, how they timed it. So I
But
had literally,
okay, so before you continue, what was the surgery? You weren't having a mastectomy, were you?
No, I had a
A
lumpectomy where they
lumpectomy.
removed the
Okay.
tumor and the lymph nodes. And then they were able to do some additional surgery to sort of make the breast even and whatever. So that it was going to be like a day-long surgery. So I get a call from this woman from the retreat place. And she's like, you know, we had an opening, things have changed. She said, she was kind of laughing it off. She's like, this is the universe, just making sure that the right people are, brought together. And, we're kicking off, the following week. Are you able to join? And I was like, yeah, I'll be there. And so that for me was the moment when things started to change in my life. And I say that because I had just been through the crappiest, I don't know, 4 months of my life. And again, I was always making sure everybody around me was okay and were they, comfortable with what I'm going through. And I was like, I'm gonna do this for me. And so I packed up my bags and, off I go. And she had asked me, she said, do you mind? There's a woman flying down from Connecticut who's also coming in. Do you mind picking her up at the airport and bringing her with you? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so, that's when it was amazing.
I can
So I
feel it.
get
I
out.
actually am getting,
I know.
I feel like I feel the emotion, like I'm gonna cry. And you, it was a sisterhood.
It was. And I got out there. And first of all, the setting is unbelievable. It's like in the woods, and there's a creek running through the property with a waterfall. And I was assigned to this little cabin with the woman who had come down from Connecticut for the retreat, and then two other people that have just become lifelong friends. And we were right there by the creek. And from the get go, I mean, it was emotional. I mean, there were these really deep, sessions. We had a Reiki practitioner come in and do Reiki sessions on all of us. We had Qigong by the water, the food. It was, plant based, nourishing, amazing food. And, we would talk about the importance of what we ingested. And not only that, we would just laugh and laugh and laugh. And I'm looking around the room at this group of women, and we're all in different stages of our journeys, but we all had that common theme, and all different types of cancer. It wasn't just breast cancer, it was different types. And I didn't feel like I had to put on a facade or an act for anyone. I was absolutely able to be myself. Like I said, we would laugh, we would cry, we would go off and be by ourselves. It was the most amazing 4 days of my life. And it totally turned me around. And
In
as
what
I said,
way? How did it turn you around?
well, it, okay, first of all, it sort of took me outside of, like, I went from being like internally focused to, to looking around me, to really appreciating what I was seeing, like whether it was nature, whether it was these beautiful women. I just felt so grateful and so appreciative. This is where I really found the roots of my gratitude practice, because I just, I literally feel like when I walked in there, my heart just opened up. I don't know how else to describe it. My heart opened up, and I was actually grateful that everything that had happened to me brought me to this place. And it was then like I just started to stop being sad and feeling sorry for myself. Now, don't get me wrong, I'll still feel sad and sorry for myself, but it wasn't like my leading emotion. It was, I really shifted to operate from a place of gratitude. Meditation, I had never meditated. I never even, I prayed, but it didn't come close to what I was introduced to there, where, I look to the universe, where I look to Mother Earth, where I just felt connections at levels where I had never felt connected before. I really felt like I became a different person. And so, but I wasn't. I'm still saying me, but I was, had these new experiences. And so I think like the people in my life, and I'm still even like a little bit like my daughters will like they kind of chuckle like, oh yeah, mom, you did that or whatever. But I won't say it became woo woo because I wasn't, but I was just more open about things. And so I got involved in volunteering. I worked for this organization. In fact, the woman, Shannon, who runs the organization, is still to this day like one of my dearest friends. And there was an incident a few years later that was a very, very upsetting and difficult incident that happened with my family. She was the first person I called. Like that's like she's that level of individual where you can count on her at any moment, and she's just amazing, and she just exudes this joy and this compassion for others, and so you want to be part of it. And so, I got into volunteering. I started like understanding or exploring greater possibilities, just ways to give back so that just because I felt I'd been given a gift and I wanted to open that up to others and share it with others. Like I want everyone, I wanted everyone, I still want everyone to know about this. And so people hear like, oh, so you had cancer. Oh, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, don't feel sorry. It was the best thing that ever happened to me on many, many levels because I would still be kind of chugging along. And because of that experience, I met these people. I was open to these new experiences, these new opportunities. I just started to see the world differently. I really began to trust in the universe. I still need practice in that, but I've, learned that I have to just trust in what gets presented to me, even if it's horrible, because there's always growth and learning opportunities in everything you do. And so that's kind of become how I live my life. And so I realized I don't need to have, Mary Jo from up the street come sit with me at chemo to make Mary Jo feel happy, right? I also learned to apply this to myself, right? So I need to speak up for myself. I need to, in a loving way, but just be very clear about what I need and where I might have boundaries and respect those. Another thing that I learned was that I was not I had been around a lot of people who I considered toxic, who were always complaining and always, looking for, the bad in everything and in everyone. And I didn't have time for that anymore. I don't have time for that anymore. And I removed myself from a lot of that toxicity and the negativity. I don't want to be around it. I like to laugh and I like to have fun. And that's when I feel like I'm at my best. And so, people that are going to bring me down, I don't have time for that anymore.
Okay, I've furiously been writing notes because I need to back way up. So, a few things that you said. And my listeners know I started to bring in my oracle cards into the reading because they always have this beautiful message that ground the conversation, but also what somebody else needs to hear. And the way that you describe yourself, you're going to die when you see the card that I pulled. But look how beautiful this card is. Do you see? It says poise. Isn't that the
Poised.
most? Isn't that the most beautiful card?
Beautiful.
And the message is being ready, bringing something to light, being at your best in confidence. It's the very short message, but the intuitive message is around poise for me and what you're talking about. And my listeners have heard me talk about all of these things. But one thing, the name of this podcast, Rock Your Shine After You've Been Cracked Wide Open, that for so many of us, we have to have some sort of a wake up call to understand that we are so much more than these bodies that we're in, right?
Hmm.
We are souls. We are
Hmm.
all connected, right? And
Yep.
most of us just go about our day and really actually buying into this fact that we're all individuals and like this is life. And when we have that wake up call, somebody dying in our life that splits us wide open, having our own trauma, some sort of catastrophic event, which is all the things that you're describing. You know, people hear me talk about meditation all the time because meditation is a practice that helps us to understand that we are much more than what shows up in the mirror.
Yeah. Right.
And that when we have a catastrophic event, when we are with other people that understand that, whether it's, you know, people who are in a group that get, you know, parents who have lost a child, right? Whatever connects us, you are with women who understood looking at their own mortality. I'm sure some of those friends that you met did not make it.
Correct.
And we'll get to that. But when you're facing your own mortality,
Yeah.
you know, it's one thing I talk about is that we all know that we're going to die, and knowing that should drive every decision we make. But somehow we all forget it or don't want to think about it, or afraid of it or whatever. But we will transition, and
Yeah.
knowing that is should drive every moment, being present, all of the things that we hear in the mindfulness practices. And there you are in the middle of the woods, and that internal, all of the concern, all of the worry, all of the things that go on. And all of a sudden, you opened up to life. That's what you did. You opened up to life, to
Yeah.
your life, to this is a gift. Every single breath that we take is not, it's a gift. We don't know how long we're
Yeah.
going to be here, right? So you had your awakening that really started to drive these different decisions that you make in your life. Let's talk about self-love and compassion. Let's talk about that because we are taught that putting self first is selfish.
Yeah.
And the idea of true self-compassion is just the opposite. Love for others has to start with self. What does that mean? What does that look like? Knowing what we need, being able to be authentic. Most of us walk around with masks all day long. So I want to talk about this because I feel like the idea of ripping off these masks, which is exactly what your cancer did, right? You had to do
Hmm.
layers of work. That 4 days was just the beginning of
Yes.
your journey. You didn't even know if you were going to survive at that point, right? The cancer could
Uh-uh.
have come back.
Uh-uh.
Nobody
Mm-mm.
knows with cancer. So talk to us. Okay, so you had this 4 days isn't very much time,
Mm-mm.
but it was enough to plant a very profound seed, right? You had to continue with your meditation practice. Tell us what life looked like when you left the retreat center. You were finished with your chemo at that point, correct?
Hmm.
But
But it
had
was right
not yet
up
had your, yeah.
surgery. So I don't know, like, if you or, if your listeners have gone on like retreats. I used to go on retreats, like whether it was at school or, different things. And you come home and you've got that glow and the euphoric feeling for a few days. And then usually then it's like shoop, slip right back into your old routines and life goes on. And yeah, that was a lot of fun, but what did it do for me? That didn't happen this time. The glow and the euphoria sort of continued. And I kept waiting for it to dissipate, and it really didn't. And I think that a lot of that was because uh connection. I think connection was one of the main things. I had that connection now with Shannon, which introduced me to a whole new catalog of experiences and people. I had the connection with the women who were on my retreat, with the women who were in my cabin, the small group. There was one young woman in particular who lived in Charlotte also, and she was real young. She was like my daughter's age. And she and I bonded, and we're still super, super close friends, like to this day. But, we would continue to talk and to meet up. And I had been introduced to some things that I hadn't experienced before, like, for instance, the healthy eating. So I was trying to continue that. the meditation, the breathing, the small tips and techniques that were introduced to us on that weekend that were easy to integrate into my daily life. Keeping a gratitude journal, keeping a sketch pad nearby, anything that would help me express my fears, my joys. I needed an area to, sort of document what I was experiencing and then reflecting on it in a positive way. I kind of made the decision at that point too that I was going to adopt the philosophy of helping others, but like helping others not in a, I don't know how to describe, just helping others reach this epiphany themselves, right? So like I'll never forget when radiation started. This was a couple, like a month later after the surgery, and I was at one of my early radiation appointments. And this woman came up to me in the waiting area and she said, I've been watching you. And she said, I want to be around you. Like, okay, that's super creepy. But then I'm like, oh, okay. And like those types of things were starting to happen to me. And I realized because I had this change was more than just a surface thing, it was from within me. I was coming across differently to people. I think
You were
I
changing your vibration. Let's
yes,
get really
yes,
technical. You were
yes.
changing your vibration, and that vibration that we put
That
out into the
was at the
world,
time. That
yeah,
was it. That
that
was
was
it.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I realized then, like it was starting to come to me that you attract what you give off. And that really was, like I said, I sort of cut the toxic and the negative out of my day to day as much as I possibly could. Sometimes you can't cut that out entirely, but I wanted to be with the like energy that was going to build me up. And so, I started going to workshops that were local, that were, you know, around spirituality and, creative expression, things that I had never really explored. I was open to these things now. So that I mean, that's kind of how the change, like, just sort of took root and continued.
And so let's talk about let's talk about the positivity and energy that we put out into the world. I used to train clinicians around being aware of their energetic field because in this idea, we've all heard of the language of grounding yourself and what does that mean? And the spiritual gurus out there, like you have to be aware of who you're letting into your energetic field, all of the things, right? And
Yeah.
especially those of us who are empaths, it's really important because we absorb that energy. Sometimes we don't even know it belongs to us. Therapists have to keep their energy pool clean, or they can create more chaos in dealing. And I'm talking energetically, right? And so,
Hmm.
how did this impact your relationship with your husband, right? Because this is something with grief that we talk about a lot. Men and women grieve very differently. And your husband had his own worries and concerns, right, that he probably didn't share with you. But as you're going through this profound change in your life, what does that look like in your relationships with your kids, with your husband, with your sibs? Like, what do you notice is going on around you?
Yeah. So that's really interesting. So with my husband, you're absolutely right. He was very concerned, very afraid. And I was really proud of him. And he knows this because he reached out, right, to others and not just, family, but like reached out to friends and, was able to process a lot of what he was feeling that way instead of, shutting down. He was there for me. He is always there for me every step of the way. And he was for me, super supportive. Anything I, wanted to do, he would never criticize. He's an amazing person. He really, really is. And the thing that I like to look back on is, oh my gosh, we would cry. Uh, but he would also make me laugh out loud like every single day. Like he might send me an email and it was like, I would burst out laughing. And that to me was so important because what it did was it maintained sort of the normalcy of our relationship. I mean, that kind of brought us together in the first place, that, we had a shared sense of humor and, we just love one another. And so we never lost that. And we were able to work together through the sadness and through the scary pieces. And then when I had this transformation, or, this experience that sort of turned me around, again, because he was always so open-minded and supportive, and, he was totally open to it. He maybe didn't always get it, and he still doesn't always get it, but he never would try to stop me or make me feel, like I'm a weirdo or anything because of some of these things that I'm exploring. And even like some of the stuff that I got like into reading that I hadn't entertained before, like, different thoughts about, life and multiple lives and all that kind of stuff. Like he would never explore that on his own, but I would say, read this book and tell me what you think. And so we could have like good conversations about it. Not that he's like totally into it, but he never like dissed me on it. And then as far as my kids are concerned, oh, they still sort of laugh at me a little bit about it, but they'll be the first ones to tell you that I think they prefer hanging out with post-cancer mom versus pre-cancer mom, because I don't let stuff bother me. I'm not
Yes.
moody anymore. I've kind of let all that go. And like I said, I'm getting the negative out there, and I'm just I feel like I'm a more pleasant person to be around.
I think about all of the things that I went through after I lost my brother, and hundreds of conversations I've had since around grief. And the similarities are stunning to me because we're not talking about you dying, but you went through a deep grieving, right? Of you're not the same person that you were. And
Not.
and that's the same with survivors of losing someone. I'm not the same person I was. I'm just not. And
Mhm.
part of that wake up call is understanding, and I'm not trying, well, I guess I am trying to trivialize, but so many things that we get wrapped up and worry about really are silly. It wastes a lot of precious time because we think we have this control that we simply just don't have a
Mm-mm.
control. We have a control over how we respond to things that happen to us in our life. That's what we have control over.
That's right.
And I always make this distinction with my clients that I work with. Do you want to react or do you want to respond? And when we can respond, we're coming from a much more intentional, thoughtful place than having our emotions just run amok, right? And take over our life. That's what meditation is about, to maintain that center. We're humans, we're going to have pain. Do we want to react or do we want to respond?
Yeah.
And I think that's when I think about who you are and when I met you, that you respond to your life in after my brother died, there are so many things now that just I don't get it doesn't even phase me, things that I used to get upset about. Let's talk about, though, how this has had an impact on your professional life, because I
Hmm.
think for many of us, we get very caught up in the identity of who we are in our professional world, and how we respond rather than react, and how that impacts us. How did this experience impact you in the way that you approached your work, look at your work? What did that look like in your professional life?
Yeah. So when I was going through all this, when I was diagnosed, at the time I had my own little consulting company, and it was a little LLC, and I had a pretty sizable contract. I just had the one client, but they were huge. And I operated, even though I was a contractor, I was sort of an extension of their team. And so they were great, but I was able to keep working through my treatment, which was another great thing, because when I would be like on a call or when I'd be working on something, I was back to being Maggie, the working person, not Maggie, the cancer patient. It really, and so I do because I have in subsequent to like my treatment and everything, I did take the opportunity to become a cancer coach. And so a holistic cancer coach. So I work with cancer survivors, helping them, manage sort of their experience. And that is something that when it comes up, we'll talk to my client about, with work and, the ability, if you can, to kind of keep going with it, just to give yourself that, I don't know, that anchor and that ability to sort of, hold on to a piece of you that, you know, is obviously, important. So anyway, so I had my own business and I kept doing that for a few more years, but I wasn't sure after this all like wrapped up, was I going to be able to continue that? Is that really what I wanted to do? And it was in the healthcare field, but it wasn't, it was like doing safety programs for hospitals and, about safe patient handling and slips, trips, and falls. And it was meaningful work and it was fine, but I didn't feel like passionate about it. And so I kind of went back and forth, like, what do I want to do? And I had this opportunity came to me through someone that I knew from a prior work experience, reached out and said, hey, there's this company and they're hiring and they need somebody to set up sort of like a customer success department. It's in mental health. And I'd never done anything in mental health before. And so I was like, well, why don't I can try that, and it was like a job. I wasn't going to be a contract. Your face, you're cracking me up because, where this leads. And so I was like, okay, and I did it and I loved it. And oh my gosh, I was like working with clinicians who were, working with these patients who just have had, so many different experiences and hardships. And, from working in the mental health field, like it takes a certain type of person who's going to enter that field of honestly service, helping these people recover their lives and, be able to, um, you know, become healthier. And, it just opened my eyes to like a whole new world. And I loved it. And I'm not a clinician. I'm not a clinical person. And I always will say that when I like, I'm not a clinician, but I was able to provide, you know, what I could to help them in this of their practice. And so, whether it was allowing, helping them use measurement based care to, treat their clients and improve their lives. I loved that. But more than anything else, what I loved, and this, was forming those relationships with these people and working with these people and, listening to them. And so, I was at this one company, I went to another company, which is where I met you. And, we were doing this during COVID. And like COVID hit like right after I had started working with you. And then all of a sudden, all of our clients are having to figure out how to treat their patients on the telephone, some of them.
Yes.
Like they
Yeah.
didn't have like these clients didn't have, not our customers, but the clients. So these are the patients. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have Zoom at home. I mean, now it's so like second nature and we all have it. But, you remember like we were worried about families that were stuck at home where there might be an abusive situation and how
Hmm.
do people get help. And, so it really was so fulfilling. And I feel very grateful that I had the opportunity to be part of that in the role in which we were able to be part of that. You
And
know what
and
I
I
mean? Like,
and I'm connecting this with your experience because your experience as a patient, right? I think it was almost, I mean, I love the serendipitous events that happen in our life that prepare us for the next thing. And because you had had that deeply personal experience and being able to bring that personal perspective into mental health, so that even though you didn't have any previous experience in mental health, you had the personal experience and understood what it felt like to feel helpless, because that is what happens in mental health. People come because they are in deep pain,
Yeah.
quite frankly, and they're looking for a lifeline. And I, when I think back of our work together, when you say that you weren't a clinician, it was amazing for me, because I had always been on behavioral health, had always worked with clinicians. And
Mhm.
so, but your degree of empathy and compassion, I wouldn't have put that together then, because I didn't know your whole cancer story,
Mhm.
because it was unusual for someone to be on the outside of that world and to come
Yeah.
with such a deep understanding and compassion in the role that you were in, which is why I loved working with you so very much. All right, I have two questions that I always end with, but before I go there, I want to go back to the moment when you got back from chemo, you are sick, and there you are making dinner. I'm sure that there are other listeners where that kind of struck them too, because for me, I'm like, I just want to yell at everybody in the room and be like, why are you letting her cook? Well,
Well,
how did that change using your voice, and what, because the question is, what does self-love look like for you
yeah.
now? And in that, speaking to this of taking care of the entire world and ignoring your own needs, what does self-love look like for you now?
Right. So self to me, I have learned in the past 9 years, whatever, to recognize when I am I'm being depleted. That's the best way to describe it. Like when things are happening and I'm like overwhelmed, or I'm finding it difficult to do anything. I still have those times. We all do. And I have since I will do what I need to do to nourish my soul. I've realized that, or my whole being, not just my soul, my whole being. And so, like for instance, during COVID, and I think you might remember this, like things were very, very tense and really bad. And I went away by myself for like 3 days. I booked a little
I remember this.
I booked a place up in the Virginia on a river, went by myself, didn't watch television. I just sat with my journal, uh, had brought food, and I didn't even have cell service. Like it was that, remote. And because I needed to replenish. And again, I am blessed with the most amazing spouse because he's like, go. Well, he also knows that if he doesn't, it's going to be hell for him if I'm like, "Rah." So he's so supportive in that. But I continue to do that. So, like nowadays, if I've had a bad time or if things are piling up and, like I said, they still happen and it's dinner time, like, hey, you're on your own. Right? Like, I'm not going to make dinner for somebody when I'm not even going to eat myself. I mean, that ship has sailed and that's totally fine. But I know to do things for myself. And it might be like we've since moved. We live near the coast. I live near the ocean. I will say, hey, I'm going to take a walk on the beach. And I hop in the car and I go to the beach. Or, I do more things for myself. Exercise. We haven't even touched on this. I never exercised before I got sick. And now, like, it is a big part of who I am. I'll belong to a gym. Right now, I work out with a trainer. I do yoga. I take care of my physical being because I care about myself.
And physically takes care of your spiritual being. Going back to energy, even if you're walking, you're moving energy, right,
Yeah.
to get you unstuck. Sorry, I had to mention that.
Yeah, no, totally.
Thank you for bringing up the physical piece.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I try to anticipate when it's happening or recognize it. And then I put myself first. I'll think to myself, what do I need? And sometimes what I need might be just sitting out in my front porch by myself for an hour. Like, it doesn't always have to be a trip up to the river. There are things that I can do. I've started taking classes. I do pottery now. I make pottery. I make it at home. It's crazy fun. I love it. I look like the stuff I make came out of like a kindergarten class. I don't care. It's so much fun. I've
It's
been
play,
writing. Yeah,
play.
right, exactly. I've got, sketchbooks. I just keep stuff all around me because I never know what it is I'm gonna want to do, but I do it. I have a puppy. I mean, I just try to find joy wherever I can.
And that's the word that was coming to me, infuse joy. All right,
Yeah.
finish this sentence for me, because then I'll read the message of the oracle for those who
Okay.
need to hear it, right? Because whatever I pull is for the masses.
Everyone. Mhm.
Yeah. Finish this sentence for me. Hope is.
The best gift we can give ourselves.
Now, see, now I'm gonna cry. All right. So the card, guys,
My
for
God, you're
those,
like Barbara Walters. I made you cry.
it doesn't, yeah, it doesn't take much.
I know.
These conversations are always so moving. All right, so those of you who do like my oracle cards, remember I poke poised. So for any of you who need this message today, listen up. You have every reason to feel confident. Everything you need to make your success concrete is now at your disposal. You can take action knowing you are ready to step into your power, into your light, and into the service to the world. The direction you're moving is your destiny. Your soul is smiling with joy as you align with this truth. See what I mean? How these cards, it's wild. Is that not just,
That makes me want to cry, and I've got goosebumps.
yeah,
That's awesome.
isn't that beautiful?
Yeah,
So
it's really
anyone who, I've got chills now too. So anyone, you guys don't wait to do what you love to do. You've got it. Everything you need to do what is in your heart, just go do it. And Maggie, you know I have such a deep love for you, but I have wanted this conversation for so long. And I want to just thank you for sharing your heart with us and this and your journey, because somebody listening needs to hear what you just had to share. So
thank you.
thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to say that I haven't asked?
No, nothing. Just, you know, I hope people can try to find some sort of joy and, just bring light into the world because I think we're at a place where everybody needs to do that. We need to elevate energy and make the world a better place, and that starts with us. So, thank you for letting me be part of this. I'm really, really, really grateful to you. I
Thank
love you
you.
too.
And I love all of my listeners, you guys. Thanks for tuning in. And I hope you take a nugget with you that helps you on your own journey. And I'll see you here all next week. Bye for now.